I think it's interesting that despite there being a proliferation of effectiveness awards at Cannes and at a lot of the other awards within our industry, they seem to still be separate from some of the other things we talk about, the awards we really focus on. And I think until effectiveness becomes the thing that's a minimum for everything, then I think we run the risk of still awarding art over advertising sometimes.
Welcome to Punchy by Rival, where we take the gloves off to share the hard-hitting realities of the challenger marketing world. Each week, we'll break down the buzz and cut through the BS of the top stories and trends to tell you what you really need to know and do differently to grow your brand and career. All right. We are live in Cannes, France. That's why we have the sunglasses on. I'm getting some feedback. Is anyone else getting feedback or just me? All right. We might not have set this up the right way. Anyway, why don't we try turning the volume down? Sorry, everybody. Because we should be able to hear each other anyway. Cool. So, special edition of Punchy this week. We are here for the Creative Festival, which is really an advertising festival, but they call it creative to make it seem, I think, a little bit more important. So, I've been here a few times. We all obviously spent some time in the agency world, but this is our first time here as Rival, and Jenna and DuBose, your first times as well. I will say that we are in the same room today. This is our fabulous Airbnb that we are in for the week that we're here. So apologies if, well, hopefully the setup actually works. So Jenna, first impressions of Cannes.
It's like a 4-day acid trip and we're not even at Glastonbury yet.
We agreed to keep this somewhat professional.
I think that's a very accurate.
Just let go of that pretense and just get straight into it. So, Jenna, you did offer to do for those of you familiar with the Stefan skit on SNL, Jenna has volunteered to do a Stefan segment of Punchy. So, Jenna/Stefan, tell us about Cannes' hottest club.
Cannes' hottest club is Boba. It has everything. A monkey that will predict your CPMs, a DSP that somehow acquired nuclear approach codes, influencers in facial recognition jamming masks, Greenpeace activists.
It does have Greenpeace activists, actually.
It does have Greenpeace activists. That's all I got.
DuBose, thoughts on Cannes besides it's great to have free sunglasses?
The sunglasses are really, really good. That can't be understated. I think for me, the thing that's really surprising is you go as an industry, I think Cannes really highlights how advertising needs a bit more structure sometimes. Like I look around and I'm kind of like, I don't think doctors have medical conferences like this, but maybe they do. But it's been interesting.
Yeah, they have real jobs.
Yeah, like the real job factor, I think, really comes to the forefront at Cannes. But it's been some interesting conversations, and it's been great seeing people. So I think it's been good.
Yeah,
so
that part is good. I mean, everybody in the industry, of which there are actually some good people in advertising, that part is nice. Being able to catch up with people. Obviously, it is good for business to be here. A lot of our clients and potential clients are here. I think my issue with it, I guess, and having come a few times, I always find it kind of draining. And part of it is like, I'm an introvert. And so all of the networking, all of the events, just all of the people can be a little bit tiring for me. But the other thing is, and we were talking about this a little bit, and I really think this is at the core of part of what kind of, I don't know, bound us together when we were at Vayner, and also what we're trying to build here at Rival is like, I kind of fell into advertising. I ended up in this world. I don't necessarily love advertising for the sake of advertising. I'm fascinated by and love advertising for how it can actually drive the growth of businesses. And when we're out in kind of our normal world, working with clients, building our business, that's really what we're focused on. In this world, when it's down here for a week and it's only advertising people, I feel like there's a lot of the kind of everybody just is so into it and so obsessed with the awards and obsessed with the who got promoted to what title and things like this. And so I think that's the thing that kind of takes it out of me. And one of the, I guess, issues that I have with the industry to a certain extent is a lot of advertising is not actually based on what it exists to do, which is to drive the growth of the businesses. And so that's one of the things that I feel. I don't know about you.
I mean, it's an echo chamber, but it's an echo chamber with good rosé. So there are some benefits there.
We're the echo chamber. DuBose, you should mute your mic when we're not talking. Speaking of echo chambers.
All right, we got some feedback from the audience to try not to look at each other quite as much. So sorry, we'll do a better job. All right, we actually do have real news to talk about. So should we get into it? Because it's a bit of a special episode and we don't have any guests that might feel uncomfortable talking about this, and because we are here for this week of creativity/advertising, we're going to talk a little bit about some recent news in the advertising world and some of the punchy opinions that we have on it. So we're going to start with an article out of Campaign, which is Edelman hires Gen Z cohort and appoints CEO. So Edelman's Gen Z lab will employ 100 under 25s in order to offer insight into the Gen Z consumer mindset. And I believe that it will be overseen by the chief brand officer of Edelman, Jackie Cooper, who I think is the daughter of the CEO, or DuBose. I know you surfaced this article, so why don't we start with you? Thoughts, and let me know if I got any of that wrong.
I don't think you did. I know it's an Edelman that I think is the COO of it, and I think is also Gen Z. I mean, I think the bottom line for something like this is it comes down to the idea that I think as advertising, we tend to fetishize like certain audiences is almost if they're from a different planet. Like I think the thing about Gen Z and millennials before it is useful to understand any audience that you're making advertising for. But at the end of the day, I don't think you have to arrange an army of them to come sit in your agency to do so. I think it's just like anything. In psychology, they call it the phenomenological perspective. It's the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes. And I think all good advertising does that, whether it's Gen Z or whether it's 90-year-olds or whether it's anywhere in between. And I think it's interesting that we tend to forget that when we think about things like Gen Z. And that's where you get stories like this and ZEOs, which is a reason why to be slightly questionable about it to start with. So I think bottom line for something like this is great intent, I guess, but terrible execution.
Sorry, I got it wrong. So the CEO, it'll be overseen by the Edelman's Global Chief Brand Officer, Jackie Cooper. And then Amanda Edelman, the daughter of agency founder Richard Edelman, will take up the role of Gen Z COO. Edelman's still private, right? I think so. So they can kind of do what they want, I guess. But it is interesting. I mean, stuff like this, like there is something obviously to trying to understand this audience better. And I know, DuBose, you always say, like, I hate that everybody always throws out the same quote about Gen Z. Give me an actual differentiated insight on this audience. But I find that so much of this stuff, and again, looking around the week here and the world that we're in right now, so much of it is kind of, this is such a headline grab to me. It's such like a, we're going to set this up so that we can make a big splash and people think that we actually know this world and what we're doing in this world. But actually, if they had some real work to show for how they've actually done campaigns or built businesses, built brands for this audience, that would be the more interesting thing to look at. And so maybe it starts here, if we're being generous and we're being supportive, maybe it starts here and it gets to that. But I'm always a little bit skeptical of things like this. Jenna?
I really like that they stated that the purpose of this was that they're like, oh, well, we want to advertise to Gen Z because Gen Z cares about things like how you treat your employees and like all this other stuff. And I feel like some of the defining characteristics of Gen Z is, they're very progressive, that they really kind of like favor these, like, a lot of social policies because they've just watched millennials be the poorest, probably like most economically disadvantaged generation, like in forever. And then they put in a member of Gen Z who is the most rich, privileged. Like, what does Amanda Edelman know about Gen Z other than like literally having been born like in the same cohort? But I don't think that she has, or again, like, probably a lot of the people that they're hiring really have like the actual legitimate like cultural insight into like, why Gen Z cares about how you treat your employees? Because Gen Z grew up in a world where like minimum wage is not a living wage. I don't really know that Amanda Edelman, who went to Stanford and is at Harvard Business School, really has a great idea of exactly why Gen Z really cares about employee welfare and is significantly more likely to support unions and workers' rights. I don't know that that's really the perspective that she's bringing or is going to bring to advertisers. I think that's really, the subreddit, self-aware wolves on Reddit. Self-aware, it's a portmanteau of self-aware and werewolf. Self-aware wolves.
No idea what you're saying, but continue.
It's just basically all people who are miraculously close to getting the point, but missing it entirely. Edelman, miraculously close to getting the point that Gen Z cares about, like a lot of social issues, largely as a function of like widening inequality and like, you know, the increasing pipe dream of home ownership and education being out of touch for, you know, large portions of the generation, and installed one of the most privileged members of the generation to be in touch with them.
So close, and yet
so close.
So far.
It's funny, right? It's basically like, say, it's performative insights at this point. Because you kind of go, so it's very similar to in the 1960s. I think it was McCann noticed that there was a countercultural kind of anti-consumerism movement. And the smartest thing they did being advertising is they went and hired the people that were trying to say advertising was evil and gave them jobs in advertising. And, you know, it led to work like I'd like to teach the world to sing Coca-Cola ad, where you took the values of kind of anti-capitalism and then used them for capitalism. But the way you did that was you had to put them in the creative floor at the heart of the organization so that the values of what they were trying to tap into actually come through in the work. And I think when you do something like this, it's the exact opposite of that. You've created a walled off creche where you're throwing 100 Gen Z folks to hang out while the real work is done somewhere else. And I think trying to integrate those two things is the only way you start to get a value out of something like this.
What should agencies, or chances are, you know, for people listening and our clients, our audience is going to be more brand side marketers, what should they be doing to try to understand and better communicate to and change behavior within a Gen Z audience? DuBose.
I think the key thing for Gen Z is to go, what's generational and what is age-based cohort behavior? Like, I think there's an interesting thing that we tend to assume Gen Z do certain things because they believe wildly different things than the generations before or after them. But to Jenna's point, a lot of these things are just a reaction to A, their life stage, and B, how the world is right now. Like, if you think about some of the bullshit Gen Z insights that are out there, the idea that they value experiences, not goods, that's because it's impossible to buy a lot of the goods they would like. So if you can't own a home, traveling then does become a thing that you spend your money for. Or the idea that, you know, they buy into purpose more than other audiences. And I think a lot of that comes from the idea they probably don't want to be stuck with a dead planet. And I think at the end of the day, it's not that they're wildly different attitudes. It's that there's a response to the world as it is right now. And I think when you start to think about it like that, they're not aliens that have come from somewhere else and have a different belief structure. They're just living in the world and trying to make their way through it. And I think recognizing the audience as that is the best way to make effective work for them.
10 points to you, DuBose. I thought those were solid answers. Also, your sunglasses look fantastic. Jenna, 5 points to you for struggling through with your hoarse voice and not cracking. And I know you got that hoarse voice from sitting quietly in a room and working really hard these last 3 days. So you get extra points for that.
Do my sunglasses not also look amazing?
They look pretty good. Yeah, they do look pretty good.
That's okay.
Yeah. All right, moving on. Next article. I actually had a couple people send this to me. I know that we surfaced it in our Punchy Slack channel, but it seems to be not only us that's poking a little bit of fun at the new mascot from Publicis for their Metaverse endeavors. So Publicis now has 1,000 staff working exclusively on Metaverse projects. As part of that, they, for some reason, have introduced a new chief Metaverse officer, a digital avatar called Leon. Or Leon, potentially, since I assume he's French. And he's actually slightly terrifying. For those of you that are watching, I'm going to share my screen so that you can see Leon. But why don't we get into a conversation about this? Jenna, how are you feeling about Leon and Publicis's 1,000 staff working on Metaverse projects?
I think this guy ranks up there with Clippy in terms of quality. What?
Wait, Clippy, like the clip art little guy that pops up?
Yeah.
Who doesn't like Clippy?
I mean, I'm not saying that that Clippy wasn't liked. I'm saying that Clippy was not a well-designed mascot.
Oh, okay. Very cool. As long as you're not.
I'm not anti-Clippy.
Oh, shade.
I'm not anti-Clippy. Right, Clippy was pretty obtrusive and obnoxious. So we have yet to see how Leon behaves in the world. Like Leon.
But he's not going to behave in the world. He's going to behave in the meta world.
Oh, I really hate you.
I'll shut up now, please. Give a valid and smart point to this.
I don't know. I really want to shit on this. I really like my first reaction is just to be like, oh, I fucking hate this because I kind of do.
Oh God, he's holding a cell phone too. I didn't even realize that. Did you see that?
Well, what else would he be holding?
I guess so. Okay. Anyway.
And also, I guess they would have to resolve the question of like how many fingers does he have? Because I feel like with mascots, like the hands are like really make or break. Like this is a chance for a Simpsons reference, DuBose. You're really welcome for this. I mean, because that's really like one of the ones that'll like really humanize a mascot, or it'll make it feel really alien. Is the hands. So good for them for getting it out there. I feel like. Yeah, you know me. I do. I want to shit on this, but I also feel like, you know what? How many employees is Publicis? Like 100,000? They're really big. They're really, really big. 1,000 people for a company of that size. Even though, you know what? I don't think that like the metaverse, the way that like Facebook envisions it and like puts it forward and like in a conversation, I don't think that that's the concept that's going to have legs, that's going to continue to exist in 20 years. But there definitely is something to the concept of like the broader metaverse and like, you know, broader like digital experiences. And I'd be willing to bet that the majority of like those 1,000 people are probably involved in some of those like entries into it rather than like the Facebook conception of it. And yeah, probably for a company of Publicis' size, this seems like a good allocation of resources.
80,000 people. Publicis, yeah. 80,000 people. DuBose, what do you have to add?
I think it's how we define the metaverse to figure out like what are they actually doing. I mean, it's intriguing because 1,000 people working on things could be 3D modelers. It could be people who are already doing design and in kind of Unity or other things. But I think the bigger point here is twofold. A lion doesn't have thumbs, so a phone is basically useless. It would need to be a much larger phone. And also they're apex predators. I don't really think we need them in the metaverse. And the second thing here is really stuff like this just isn't helpful beyond a PR story for the adoption of technologies like this. I think it really highlights that you kind of, if you think NFTs are underbaked and a little bit immature, like the metaverse makes them look completely thought through and a valid tool for marketers, because the number of people working on something only matters when technology is incredibly nascent. What you want to know is what those 1,000 people are delivering, what they're doing. And I think, you know, mascots are interesting, but what I really want to hear is what's the vision for what you're developing? How is it going to tie to brands? And I think those are the things that tend to get glazed over at this phase in a technology's development.
Do you think they should have actually appointed a chief metaverse officer, like a human being that would be in charge of all of these efforts? I mean, I'm sure they have somebody, but is that not a bit of a miss? Because now the punchline is that it's kind of a bit of a joke that they've created a lion with no thumbs to do this. But if it was a person, I mean, sure, there'd be a couple people that like poke fun at it. But I guess my 2 cents, then I'll let you answer quickly on the whether or not it should have been a human as opposed to a digital lion. I mean, you do need to start with the investment of, particularly for an agency, people, time, money, to start to figure out new areas. And as I think we're all aligned on, and we're starting to get a little bit more into the space as Rival, there is going to be a huge shift and a huge opportunity for brands and businesses in this space. I think it's going to take a lot longer than people think. But you do need to start with, okay, we actually need some people to go start figuring this out, to start exploring this, to start working with clients. I think the lion almost detracts from it a little bit. What do you think, DuBose?
I think at the end of the day, we need a chief metaverse officer as much as we needed a chief social officer about 5 or 6 years ago.
But that was a thing. That was a thing. You remember? And there are still chief digital officers.
It's interesting, right? Because like chief digital officer has become broad enough that there's probably an integration value there, though I still think it's not super helpful because it silos digital, which is, you know, at this point an integral core part of any marketing mix. But I think when you think about this, the value in something like metaverse developments, especially in the short term, is going to be how they integrate and scale through other channels, how they work together with the wider marketing mix. So they're not just one little thing that's thrown out. And I think having someone whose only job is to think about that, unless they've been tasked to think about how it integrates into the wider structure of a giant holding group like Publicis, then at that point, it's doing it a disservice.
I'm going to put 20 points up for grabs on whoever can quickly pitch me the best idea for the Rival chief metaverse officer. Does not have to be an animal, can be anything.
Are there points available for answering the question if lions have thumbs? Because that's what I was.
Answered that.
I think the DuBose is wrong with this. I
Oh,
think
you
the
have a contrarian opinion. I think we could probably solve that. But does anybody have a pitch for the rival chief metaverse officer?
I think it should be a crippling sense of doubt that we fashion into a small ball and put a tie on.
Okay. If you can mock that up for me by the end of the week, 25 points, DuBose. Well played. Shall we move on? So this is a meaty conversation. It's actually not a story, but shout out to Mikhail Mizkin. Sorry, not pronouncing that right, I'm sure. He's the VP of marketing at Slice, and he put a post out on LinkedIn that Jenna shared in our Slack channel. And I think it's a really interesting and timely topic to discuss given where we are. So he said, here are my two biggest concerns about working with advertising agencies. And basically, I'll break it down. We'll include the post. We'll include the link to the post in the show notes. But he basically says, hey, the pitch process is broken in large part, and we have additional thoughts on this, but in large part because you get the CEO or you get the top team who's not actually going to be working on your business. So it's kind of a bait and switch. And actually, you're not actually getting the experience of what it's going to be like to working with the agency. And then the other thing that he said is that the problem is essentially churn. So you spend so much time as a business, as a brand marketer, getting agency people up to speed on your business. And then there's so much turnover within these ad agencies that 6 months later, 12 months later, that person leaves. And then you have to start all over again with somebody new. So I know we have a lot of thoughts and are trying to do things a little bit differently to fix the issues that we see within the traditional agency and consulting model. But what do we think about these two pain points and what Mikhail has to say on them specifically? Jenna, I'll start with you.
I feel like this is so much closer to like the heart of like the Gen Z conversation, right? Where it's like Gen Z just doesn't put up with like the fucking bullshit that like people had to like put up with in the workplace before. And that like realistically, like if companies really wanted to understand like the insights about this generation, they would stop like putting workplace expectations that are like wildly outdated that lead to this kind of churn. And I think that this is only going to get worse, like especially like say with younger workers. Like what is it like? Millennials and Gen Z, I think, have like the shortest like average tenure like in roles versus prior generations, because like agencies and like other entities have so conditioned this behavior that you have to, like, in order to get a raise or advance in your career, you have to go somewhere else, and that they won't pay for this existing talent. And like, I was gonna say, like, I won't name who it was, but we all worked like on a client in London where, I saw the services schedule for like their holding group agency, and like within that contract were very onerous like provisions around backfill times for roles and how long those roles were like, allowed to sit open, what percentage of the scope team was allowed to be like open at any given time. And frankly, I wish that those things were more common. I wish that there was like, more requirements like from like contractors, especially like, like when we talk about like purpose-driven like brands or whatever else, like there should be requirements for like, what, it should be painful if you can't keep the talent that I bought. Like there should be commercial penalties for that, because this is a services business. No matter how much you want to productize or like do whatever, we still work in a communication and professional services business that is reliant upon the actual people doing those services for you. And if you're not getting those people, then you're not getting what you paid for. And there should be financial penalties for those things, I think.
I wonder if that's something that we could look at. I know that we're literally, not just building the plane while we're flying it, but also building it on a live stream. But we've talked a lot about trying to solve this on the talent retention side of things. So how we think about compensation, how we think about building culture, all the things that have gone into where we are at Rival right now. But I wonder if we could also look at it from a commercial perspective, with our clients and trying to work something like that in. Because I do think it's a problem that needs to get solved. It's a pain point for a lot of clients, but also it's a lot of opportunity for a business like ours or other businesses to do things differently. And I think be more appealing and differentiated with how they work with clients. DuBose, what do you have to add?
I tend to agree with Jenna in the idea that I think as a services business, what you are buying above all else is people bought into an agency philosophy. And the people are the ones who are going to deliver that. So if you were to go to a restaurant and then halfway through your meal, someone else came out after your original waiter left, asked for your order again, and then another person swapped a few minutes later, you would find that absurd. And I think at the end of the day, we are a service. So providing that in a consistent way with people who understand a client's business is an integral part of the deal and the way a pitch is won. I will say, I think the interesting thing about this conversation and the story like this is it does really show how the pitch process is fundamentally broken to get good work. I think at the end of the day, appointing a competitive environment where multiple agencies go away, think about something, come back, and despite all the talk of collaboration, a lot of the time there isn't much. Come back and kind of say what they think the idea should be, what the direction should be, isn't the way they're ever actually going to work. It's a broken dynamic to start with that then you try to fix once you appoint an organization or an agency. And I don't know what the answer is, but I think at the end of the day, a much more collaborative pitch process, one that looks at blends of agencies, if you will, starts to move away from the idea of a zero-sum game, I think is going to be one of the only ways that you get better relationships, because you start as you mean to go on. And I think the way pitching sets up, it sets up a terrible precedent on both sides.
And also, so much of the focus of the pitch process is on who can come up with the best idea, as opposed to who is actually the right fit for working with us. And so I think, and we've actually done this with a couple of our clients, is instead of kind of the pitch that's focused on the big idea, we say, okay, let's do a pilot of, let's work together on something. It can be a semi-formal engagement, but at least we are actually, I relate it to when you hire someone, or when we do hiring, we always have people do an assignment, because informal conversations are great. You get to know someone, culture fit, of course, really matters. But the best way to know what it's like to work with someone is to actually work with them. And so I think there needs to be something in the new version of the pitch process, and the new version of how agencies and clients collaborate and figure out how they're going to work together, that's more focused on that. Okay. We have meetings to get to, so we're going to end on time today. DuBose, you won because of your pitch for, what was it again? Can you even remember what you pitched for the Chief Metaverse Officer of Rival? Or something wrapped up in a tie?
Crippling sense of self-doubt around technology wrapped up in a tie.
Okay, excellent. I'm impressed. That's like that scene from Good Will Hunting when he says he has 12 brothers, and then she's like, no, you don't. And he repeats it again. Did you know that my party trick is I actually know the 12 brothers that he says? Yeah. You want to hear it? So he says, I can't believe that this is on a podcast. This is real. If you're listening, for the 8 true fans that we have, let me know if we go a little bit too far. Jenna can't even handle it. Okay. So he says, I have 12 older brothers. I'm going to do it in a Boston accent for extra points. Mackie, Ricky, Danny, Terry, Mikey, Davey, Timmy, Tommy, Joey, Robbie, Johnny, and Brian. Can I drop the mic? Do I need to unscrew it to drop it? Okay.
Look at us.
Look at us.
Who thought? Not me. Not me.
Real people. Real serious people. I can't even keep a straight face. Okay. So, DuBose, you won. Do you have a rant or rave to share with us?
I do. I'll try to make one that's a bit topical this week. I think it is a rant about awards. So I think being at Cannes, obviously thinking about awards is quite an interesting thing. And I think, it is intriguing in the last few years to see how there's been a push towards more effectiveness and more business impact in the work that we award and we celebrate as an industry. And I think one of the things that strikes me is how much further we still have to go. Right. I think, congratulations to everyone that wins here at Cannes this week. You've made amazing work. And I think, it is always inspiring to see everything that comes through from the breadth of the industry. But one of the things that always strikes me is the stuff we love most. The thing we lead with is never what it delivered. It's never what it did. I think it's interesting that despite there being a proliferation of effectiveness awards at Cannes and at a lot of the other awards within our industry, they seem to still be separate from some of the other things we talk about, the awards we really focus on. And I think until effectiveness becomes the thing that's a minimum for everything, then I think we run the risk of still awarding art over advertising sometimes. And I think there is a place for that. There's, craft is something that has to be awarded and is deeply respected. And I think, really highlights some of the amazing craft here at Cannes. But I think, as an industry, coming back to what we were talking about in the beginning, to be taken as real jobs, making a real impact in the world, effectiveness has to be the first thing and the last thing that's baked into awards. And I don't think we're there yet.
I could not agree more. And it blows my mind that it's even a conversation, that it even has to be a rant. I mean, we had a meeting on Monday, and I really hope he's not listening. I don't think that he will be, but we had a conversation with someone, a senior person in the industry. This organization does a lot to contribute to the research and understanding of advertising and all this stuff. And basically his comment was like, I feel like effectiveness is really coming back as something that people talk about. And I was just like, he's not necessarily wrong either, but how is that a thing? How is, like you said, how does every conversation, every campaign everything that this industry does, how does it not just start and end with effectiveness?
It has to, because if it otherwise you're making art, you're making interesting things, but why even be held back by having a product or a logo in it?
Yeah.
And I think at the end of the day, that's our job. And I think, there are conversations here at Cannes that are encouraging, and that I think there's a lot of intent to make sure that's the case. But I think there's still a long way for us to go.
All right.
Wait, can I do
You got one? Yeah.
Rave, the asshole in line at Gutter Bar at 2:00 in the morning who wanted an itemized VAT receipt for his beers.
Was that DuBose?
It was not DuBose. It was some guy that we don't know. I'd just like to say that he was a real inspiration to douchebags everywhere.
I thought this was a rave.
Yeah, a rave.
Rave's a good thing.
Yeah, exactly. He's so inspired. You messed up my joke.
Sorry.
It's fine. He was really inspiring.
You want to try again?
No.
Got something else?
No. I got squeaky voice.
I feel like
your Stefan impersonation again, because that was actually pretty good.
Cannes' hottest ad tech company is, I don't know. I think we used all the ones we talked about yesterday on the street. I'll come up with other ones. We can make it a recurring segment.
We should. Yeah, we just need more time to work on fun stuff like this. Maybe we should take our own advice about effectiveness.
I mean, it is true though. One of the things we've been doing while we've been here at Cannes is making up various ad tech companies to see if people would believe they exist. I think yesterday we nearly convinced someone that we are an attribution company that can accurately predict the day and type of your death. And we got pretty far on that one before someone started to call bullshit on us. So
we could probably go raise money for that.
We're in Series B.
All right. We're going to wrap it up because we got places to go and we really need to open a window because it's getting hot in here. Thank you for listening. Apologies if this was not your cup of tea. A little bit of a different episode. We'll be back with a regularly scheduled, more serious, but actually never all that serious conversations and guests, if they're still willing to come on, from next week. Back to the regularly scheduled time, 10 a.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. GMT on Thursday next week. See you then. Punchy is a production of Rival. We are a growth consultancy that builds challenger brands, strategies, and capabilities to disrupt categories. If you want to learn more about us, check out wearerival.com. If you want to connect with Jenna, DuBose, or myself, email us at media@wearerival.com or find us on LinkedIn. If you enjoyed today's show, please subscribe, share with anyone you think might enjoy it, and leave us a review. Thanks so much for listening, and see you next week.